As a child of the foster care system, you're never fully prepared to hear the words, "get out." But if your very identity and ability to continue growing, having been raised, nurtured, and loved unconditionally by those you called and knew as your only family, were also the very ones who could at any moment label you as something to be deemed as less than, truly because you were not biologically their child, would you stay? My journey through homelessness, and yes, the phrase through versus overcoming applies, as many lessons helped shape and guide me towards this unapologetically proud, non-binary creative you see before you. My journey through homelessness was one fraught with battles, constant and at times never-ending. Consuming nights where even my privileged upbringing and ability to see the world in the right way was constantly brought into question, and my point of view was one that shifted daily, offering the rarest of insights. From my initial comfort and security to one of absolute survival, fighting to not only be seen, but to also be deemed deserving of basic human needs. How did my identity become the one thing that turned my once close relatives and the people I had known into complete strangers? Now memories in photo albums tucked away in some dusty storage locker? Well, it began with two questions. Who was I becoming, and where was I meant to be? I was then an adopted male-identified BIPOC, chubby-cheeked and wide-eyed, a bundle of nervous energy, just desperate to fit in and find like-minded people who not only resembled who I was, but what I wanted in the world around me. Along with my twin sister, we were brought up in a lower middle-class household, alongside a younger foster brother and 3 other siblings, the adoptive parents' biological children. So let's talk about a full house. While the responsibilities of being the oldest of the younger siblings was not one that particularly fell on my shoulders, the emotional toll of knowing that I held a majority of the previous biological and now current adoptive familial name and legacy was one that began to take effect upon seeing how my younger siblings navigated social circles. A younger adopted brother who began using drugs, becoming violent when coping mechanisms and therapy sessions couldn't address their traumatic stressors, and a twin sister, while once bonded and almost inseparable at birth, began distancing, eventually so much so that even transferring school systems allowed for access to heavy alcohol and drug use, that my ability to view our once perfect and whole family unit, now with its cracking exterior, just became a heavy burden to carry. With such a shifting and chaotic family life, this change forced me to begin hiding behind my books, living between reality and dreaming of something greater than a life outside of our small town. So as a way to cope and escape from the chaos, I began pursuing dance and private piano lessons, as well as increasing my theatrical knowledge, studying librettos and scores and listening to musical theater soundtracks. But even despite this burning desire and passion for the creative and performing arts, stood a darker and more difficult truth to accept, that I never truly belonged within this community. This was one I had always known, but what truly impacted and resulted in these traumatic inner battles was my eventual and horrified acceptance that my queer identity was not only an offense that would forever be persecutable one, but was one that would cause a communal rift with no recourse should I decided to continue down its path. The local community had previously and brutally persecuted others who were open in regards to their identity, especially individuals who were BIPOC oriented, many who either transferred to other areas or school districts or found other darker ways to cope with their demons, and I was already losing a fight that I wasn't even well equipped to fight in. As household turmoil grew, slammed doors and screaming matches now daily occurrences, the worn and weathered spines of books that had once been the fortresses of safety and security for my mental state could no longer contain my frustrations or attempts to hide my true nature of being someone our community would deem different. Supplementing my feelings with food, my jealousy towards both younger siblings, rising popularity statuses, and my twin sister's ability to freely live and explore her femininity, my being the only BIPOC presenting male struggling to exist in a sea of Caucasian students assisted in making me the easy target. The clear communal racial divide, coupled with my added discovery of my possible queer tendencies, forced me to choose to hide my identity behind a religious faith to feel a sense of communal belonging. While politically this was not to be taken lightly, as the community that I had hidden in constantly bashed and spoke out against those who lived lives I was considering identifying with, and that harmful rhetoric even applied to those people I closely affiliated with, and that mentally began to destroy me and forced me to hide who I was possibly becoming. I was unable to protect myself from those harmless religious zealots and unable to bear the thought of being even more different than the communal token black sheep that I was already becoming. I was deemed a freak, too much and too different, that my adoptive parents finally realized my cries to be seen as a person who was exhibiting the very tendencies that threatened their very need for keeping the lives of their world private, a pattern of institutionalized conversion rehabilitation disguised as religious therapeutic inhibition rehabilitation would repeat until my senior year, leaving me ridiculously overweight, medicated, domesticated, now afraid of speaking up or against anyone, and reminded that my identity was just a phase and nothing more. During this time, I can't explain to you the intensity of the feelings associated with being institutionalized, those feelings of self-doubt, worthlessness, overwhelming sense of loneliness. They were enough to drive me and at times display those suicidal tendencies. I knew this wasn't who I was, but anyone in that age didn't have the ability or even the vernacular to effectively and authentically communicate those intense feelings of loneliness and separation when from birth is all you've known and have been told. With each inpatient visit, bouts of depressive episodes would last days, and the trauma associated with being a prior foster child, and now at my most vulnerable, I felt that I was never even worthy of being loved. The moments of solace were few, and my only positive interactions were with the very few queer youth that were vocal about their identity. And we spent hours bonding over our reasons why the people around us didn't or couldn't fully grasp our reasons for wanting to live the way we wanted, instead forcing us into treatment for our condition versus accepting the new reality and working together with us to come to meaningful and impactful ways to move forward with us. While my internal discussions manifested themselves into full-blown eating disorders and struggled to accept both the new outward and inward versions of this person I was becoming, my inner demons, now quelled due to heavy medication and inability to rebel and speak out against any authoritative figures, granted me a second chance to continue my education in a stupor. I was finally discharged from the constant inpatient rehabilitation programs despite being at the bottom of the educational bracket. I was still unable to escape my living situation. Yet, luckily, despite all of the treatment, I was able to find respite within the choral music department, drawn to the freedom of expression through song and the introduction to this department that would eventually become an outlet for much of my misplaced teenage angst. Under the direction of the choral teacher's maternal direction, my anger became more manageable, quickly dissipating once I began harnessing and refining my gifts. I began to soar through the program and applied my approach to music to interpersonal situations, finding coping strategy in practicing and researching versus seclusion and binge eating. This new approach and freeing outlet granted me an opportunity to grow and eventually gifted me the chance to visit the city I now call home. Now, I know you've heard the story many, many times, the typical story of a closeted queer to cope with the pressures of the ever-changing social environment finds refuge within the performing arts. But for me, the need wasn't to perform. The need was to survive, and I needed to perform. You may wonder or question, how did you get the courage to leave, or what was the final straw? Well, simply put, it was freedom. While I may not have had the right resources available at the time, the one thing I was able to keep and grasp onto was my love for the performing arts. That unlimited freedom and unrestricted ability to give all of myself during a performance, which in turn became a form of activism that now inspires others, became a catalyst for my need to prove why I deserve to exist and thrive in spaces not meant for people like me, why I deserve to showcase art that constantly challenges the public's idea of what is deemed normal, why I deserve to create authentic, original, and heartfelt pieces of art that would inspire, enrage, and engage audiences even after my time am gone. And most importantly and selfishly, why? Because I can and could. Because it had been instilled in me and is instilled in me that the arts are not practical, and if I could and if I can, I just want to make a splash, and if I can make it, that maybe a younger version of me somewhere in the world would feel the same way I did, sitting in a theater, seeing their dreams come alive and wanting to be a part of something greater. And that if someday, even the parents that will inevitably later disown me would proudly say, that's our kid. My fight for survival was a need to be authentically seen while creating art. This came to fruition after shockingly graduating high school and enrolling locally. My first taste of limited freedom and life outside of a closely monitored and scripted life, no longer carefully planned by parents who controlled every minute detail of my entire life. Realizing that even in this new environment and a broader sea of new unfamiliar faces, the inevitable question of who am I began to resurface as more and more individuals with visible identities and tendencies populated the terrain. Despite years of shaming and hiding away this part of myself, that thirst for knowledge and desire to explore this side of Marcelle was now mere steps in front of me. Instead, spending this time focusing on my studies, my daily agenda that was once filled with hours of academia were replaced with conversing with outwardly comfortable queer individuals in both the theater and music departments, hearing personal testimony and stories of perseverance, all while planning ways to escape to New York, where a population of similarly ranged queer folk who spoke, looked, sang, acted, and danced, and were waiting in the wings of a community that I had been dreaming of becoming a part of. So over the next few months, I held a part-time job and saved enough to visit New York in secret on my own, and ultimately make the decision if I was making the right decision by thinking of leaving a town and a place I had known and called my home. And that trip turned out to be everything I had dreamed of, unfortunately cut short as my parents hadn't heard from me and cut off my credit card, resulting in an early return and an explosive reunion. Enter stage left, an extremely angry adoptive mother at a bus stop, not uttering a word, waiting to drive you back home, knowing full well a fight was mere moments away. My adoptive father had gotten home early from work, and upon exiting the car, the three of us began screaming at each other, hurling insults and throwing objects. I immediately began yelling and crying that this was the exact reason for my needing to leave to rest and reset, and them saying that I should have stayed in New York and never came back. Anger boiling, I let slip that I had found people in New York that looked like me, and I didn't have to stay with them and have them breathing down my back, and I was going to eventually move there. Them, outraged and their emotions blazing, my parents pulled out an acceptance letter from a school I had applied to secretly in New York and demanded that I withdraw my application, as well as the need to change my major to a more practical career, or I need to leave their house immediately, as an allegation of sexual assault was made by my younger sibling, and was said it was only a matter of time before I had acted on my impulses. Now, granted, my brother and I's relationship had always been rocky, and I had always attempted to remain in my parents' good graces because he was a heavy weed smoker, and despite my parents' no drug, no alcohol policy, I showed them to his weed stash, knowing that he was going to retaliate. But I assumed the SA allegation was a new low, and I was absolutely beside myself. And even with my parents' new requirement, they wanted me to go into the police station and get a written statement from an officer if I wanted to continue living within the house. And with that mandate and seeing what little of my life was left and going up in flames, I agreed. Despite the details after this point becoming fuzzy, I remember the next day being asked if I had made a decision. And while slightly confused, I responded with a vague answer. Her response, "Get packing. I want you out of our house before your father gets home, or I'm calling the police and having you escorted out." I didn't think my parents would have actually meant or stood by such a threat, as I was their child, or I had always been considered a part of this dynamic. And to be tossed aside so quickly was absolutely devastating. Packing what little I could now quickly, I purchased a one-way ticket to New York and begged a friend to take me to the bus stop. Boarded that bus, and I never looked back. Months went by, and I tried reaching out, receiving nothing but radio silence, later finding out through local contacts that I was quickly erased from the household. Any pictures or art pieces, any presence of mine was completely stripped and torn down as if I had never existed. Which begs the question, was I someone deserving of this familial rejection? Not once, as my biological family didn't want me, but now my adoptive family as well. Was my choosing to live a life that was authentic to my identity and career aspirations more important than my housing and personal relationships? Am I truly what society would label trouble or problematic? For many of our openly queer or biPOC identified youth who journey through homelessness, society would use many of those qualifying labels and what I would personally condone as trigger words, or words meant to add to the harmful and incorrect stigma surrounding those where situations present unfortunate circumstances. And a need for basic human compassion and dignity does more for one's health and well-being than being referred to as a case number or a file folder to access basic services. While on the bus, I was happy to be returning to a familiar area. I didn't have a job or an apartment, just a few dollars left over and a binder full of sheet music. So quickly typing in a housing for 17 to 18-year-olds, a local shelter catering to youth popped up on a search engine, and I walked down from Port Authority. The security officer dropped the news that the facility was at capacity and presented me with a packet of possible other locations, apologized, and wished me luck. As I was about to resume my music and walk away, he called me back, grinning, and said a bed had just opened up and to head on inside and welcome. I can't tell you if it was God, if it was fate, or some other universe-focused energy that played a part in my ability to rest peacefully. But confidently, I thank whomever was looking out for me that night, as I don't know who could have taken advantage of the scared country boy that was stuck in the city. My time in this shelter was a culture shock, for sure. Never did I anticipate seeing openly trans women in all stages of transition navigating programming and accessing resources, people from Spanish-speaking backgrounds conversing and collaborating, creating with youth from Asian Pacific backgrounds. While my sheltered upbringing provided a level of privilege for how the world operated and how certain conversations can and should be held, my social and interpersonal skills lacked real-world exposure and application. It took years, many years of taking full advantage of mental health and community building services to help put me on track to supportive independence. Guided care towards advocating not only for myself, but for others, or similarly previously lived experiences where others' voices can enact real change. Watching a once struggling organization with zero LGBT education or competency training is now one of the leading providers in its field, with myself as one of its alum and one of its on-call guest speakers. As a society, it's our job to challenge what we know, which means to erase and rewrite pre-existing text. Rewriting the binary as it pertains to our youth doesn't always mean directly relating to our cisgendered male and female unhoused youth. Each person, each youth story is unique, is layered, complex, and completely deserving of respect, and an ear that's open to critique that might be negative and positive in its remarks. No one is deserving in this life, and is instead deserving of unconditional love and respect and unlimited access to resources without strings. Almost a decade later, I am proudly standing in my identity, my artistry, my past, and my journey through homelessness is unlike any other, and I wouldn't change it for a thing.